Vanda, welcome back to Scotland. It's lovely to have you back here in Edinburgh again. I remember it was a couple of years ago you came and spoke to the Asia Scotland Institute, so we're really privileged to have you back, and in particular to have you back as a senior fellow from the Brookings Institution, to come and speak about the whole issue of what's going on in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And for us as an institute, our mission is to educate and inspire tomorrow's leaders. And so helping people get a better understanding of what's going on in different parts of Asia is hugely important. Perhaps I could ask you as the first question whether you think that's an important mission to have and whether you would advocate more people spending more time understanding what's going on.
Well, thank you very much, Roddy. It's a great pleasure to be back here, to be with you, speaking with you and your interlocutors, and of course to be in gorgeous Edinburgh and gorgeous Scotland. I have to figure out a better timing one day to see the heather blooms. That's my
later in the year.
That's
yes.
my objective. I think that it would be very hard for anyone to oppose that fundamental mission and that very important task that you endeavor to achieve, to educate tomorrow's leaders. And that's in fact also what many people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and many outside observers put their hopes in, the next generation of young people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And in other places that are troubled by difficult circumstances, whether it's Somalia, Nigeria, or even people in important rising countries like China. Of course, the education aspect of it is very important because young people can be very susceptible to radicalization, extremist views, hardly phenomena unique or consigned to countries struggling with war.
I know that your remit, your brief at Brookings is wide, and you've been kind enough to say that you will help us focus a little bit later on today in your remarks on the impact of the Trump administration's change in policy towards Pakistan with a significant reduction in funding, and what effect that will have on Pakistan and Afghanistan and how we look at the AfPak region. And I wonder if you could perhaps highlight some of the points that you will be making later on.
Pakistan continues to be a fundamental part of what's going on in Afghanistan. Pakistan has the potential to be an actor for peace. Unfortunately, both the Obama and Trump administration and prior to the George W. administration have struggled in working with Pakistan how to move to that stage where Pakistan is a vector actor for peace.
Yeah.
Instead, what all three administrations have been experiencing is Pakistan's continued support for the Afghan Taliban, including its most vicious element, the Haqqani network.
Yeah.
And all three administrations, or the prior to administration, George W. Bush and Obama administration, have tried a variety of policies from pressure to persuasion, to building a strategic relationship, to very significant economic aid to persuade Pakistan to change the behavior. Many have been deeply frustrated and disappointed with the outcomes. So the Trump administration has decided to move very much toward the punitive pressure side. That move is hardly an isolated development or did not come out of the blue. There are very many people in the prior administrations that have become deeply frustrated with Pakistan's continued support for Taliban safe havens, for Taliban logistical networks in Afghanistan. So in January of this year, one of the first tweets that President Trump sent was to criticize Pakistan for that continued support, and that criticism then translated into the United States spending at least 900 million in aid to Pakistan. I wish that Pakistan moved toward a position of fundamentally dispensing with this policy of tolerating safe havens and providing more direct support to groups like the Haqqani network in Pakistan. And I wish that came out of a deep understanding in Pakistan and the rise of a young, new, empowered generation that no longer defines its relationship with the world through the use of asymmetric warfare and support for terrorist groups. But we are not at that stage. And in the meantime, I am skeptical that the suspension of aid will produce the results that the Trump administration wants to see.
Now, it's said by some people that this policy could backfire in the sense of pushing Pakistan into the arms of their neighbours, the Chinese. How likely is that, and what are the dangers, if that happens, of relationships between Pakistan and the United States?
Well, there are multiple risks to the policy. Only one risk is a closer, deeper relationship with China. I am not that threatened or worried about the development. Pakistan already has a very close relationship with China, and in fact often defines China as its most reliable and best friend. Pakistan has relationship with other countries and should and will have those. When people highlighted the danger of backfiring, they often think about the fact that Pakistan can compensate for the suspension of military aid by developing relationships or intensifying relationship with countries such as Russia, which of course has continued to define its relationship to the United States in a deeply antagonistic view. Pakistan also has long-standing deep relationship with places such as Saudi Arabia. What I am more worried in terms of the backfire possibility is that, of course, Pakistan does not have to react to the suspension of aid and perhaps further pressure actions from the Trump administration merely by cultivating aid and friends elsewhere. It can start taking retaliatory measures against the United States or against Afghanistan. It can, for example, suspend air or ground lines of access for US military deployed and international military, of which Britain has still a significant component, deployed in Afghanistan, that would enormously hamper the military operations.
We spoke earlier about the post the whole the war, of course, in Afghanistan, the large number of Afghan refugees now in Pakistan, some of whom, of course, were born there and view it as their, not their home, because their home is in Afghanistan. How big an issue is that?
Well, it's certainly a tool that Pakistan raises. It has raised repeatedly when under pressure, and it raises it now.
Yes.
It assesses that there are 3 million Afghan refugees. The numbers are not necessarily precise, but there certainly is a very significant number of Afghan refugees. And as you said, many of whom have lived most of their life, if not their entire life, in Pakistan. And crucially, they do not easily have a capacity to go to Afghanistan. The places, the lands, the houses from which their family came may long have been destroyed, may have been taken by others. Certainly, Afghanistan already struggles with very significant number of refugees that have come back after 2001. It's now struggling with the return of foreign fighters who are coming back from Iraq and Syria. That could be a source of danger. Yeah. And it has a vast numbers of internally displaced people that are increasing as a result of the intensifying conflict. So there is no easy way for Afghanistan at all to absorb those refugees whose humanitarian situation could be dire, whose physical safety could be dire, but who could also be very destabilizing for Afghanistan and complicate the already struggling and difficult counterinsurgency effort.
My last question has to do with Afghanistan itself and your view of the durability, the resilience of its current government, and view of over what period of time we will need to see changes that could possibly ensure a peaceful governance of Afghanistan, which has had such a terrible time for so many years.
Well, peaceful and effective and accountable governance are really at the core of Afghanistan's issues. Now, Pakistan is often portrayed as the source of Afghanistan's problems. It is certainly a source, but I would say that at least an important source is misgovernance in Afghanistan, and a political behavior by many politicians that continues to be one of constant brinkmanship, parochial, power competition, self-interested, what's in me type of attitude, and often willingness to generate substantial crises, constantly generate substantial crises, rather than allow governments to govern. And the misgovernance, the inability to govern, the poor delivery of services, and continued corruption and predatory and rapacious governance are the reason why the Taliban is still so entrenched. Afghan politicians will need to come to their realization, to their reckoning with themselves about constantly putting the fundamental interest, fundamental national interest at jeopardy. So, an immediate situation is getting through the 2019 presidential elections that could be deeply contested, that could generate tremendous political crisis and paralysis, perhaps much deeper one than we saw in 2014. And international actors such as the United States and Britain and others need to resolve in their policy as to how they will react to the crisis, which will likely come. Prior to that, the government finally announced that on October 20th of this year, parliamentary elections will take place. They have been delayed for several administrations and multiple years. Conducting those elections will be very expensive and will take tremendous amount of military resources. They could again be enormously contested. On the other hand, if they are implemented successfully, that will augur well for the presidential elections. And perhaps even the parliamentary elections provide an opportunity for engaging with some moderate factions of the Taliban or associates of the Taliban, of encouraging them to perhaps run in the parliamentary elections that might be even more fruitful than any more strategic negotiations.
Well, we all hope around the world, of course, that the ballot box and not the bullet determines who's going to govern. And I know, Amanda, that there are going to be a lot of questions for you from the audience when they gather. And I wanted to end where I started, which is to thank you so much for coming back to Scotland, for agreeing to lead us through what will be a fascinating discussion. And I know you'll get a lot of questions afterwards, so thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.